Hello! In today's spooky video, we're going to be doing a sew-along of Simplicity S9165, their Beetlejuice-inspired dress pattern, to make this costume. To make this dress, I'm going to be using Simplicity 9165 and really just following their design. And for the fabrics, I'm using this black and white striped printed cotton for the base. And then for the purple, I wanted something with a little bit more detail to it. So I'm using this printed cotton with this kind of purple pink moth motif. To get the stripes to line up the way I wanted to, I cut one piece out following the pattern. Then I flipped that piece over and lined up the stripes so that the two pieces would be identical. This does use some extra fabric, so I did have to purchase a bit more than the pattern said on the back of the envelope, but hopefully it'll be worth it in the end. First, we're going to take the front bodice piece and sew some stay stitching along the top edge to keep it from stretching out. Take the side front pieces, and on the pattern piece there is a circle marked on it, and we're going to sew some stay stitching about an inch from either edge of that circle. Then we're going to snip the fabric almost to the stitching. Sew the side front pieces to the front of the bodice from the notched area to the bottom of the edge. Sew the side back pieces to the back pieces of the bodice, and then we're going to sew some stay stitching along the neckline on either piece to keep it from stretching out. Sew the bodice back and bodice front pieces together along the shoulder seams. Repeat the same process with the purple fabric to create the lining. Put the sleeve pieces right side together, and then we're going to sew them together along the bottom edge and clip into the curve to reduce the bulk of the seam allowance. Then open up the sleeve and sew a line of stitching along whichever edge is going to be the lining, securing the seam allowance down to anchor everything into place. Fold the sleeves back in half again and sew along the raw edge to hold the two sides together and press them flat. Sew the sleeves to the outer portion of the bodice. Putting right sides together, sew the lining to the outer portion of the bodice all along the neckline. Then we're going to edge stitch on the lining to help it to turn inward. Putting right sides together, we're going to sew the lining to the outer portion of the bodice along the armhole. And since we haven't sewn the side seams yet, it's just going to be one long piece, and it will create a tube so that it can be turned right side out later on. Here's what it looks like with the sleeves turned right side out. The pattern calls for edge stitching along the inside on the lining, but to be honest, I don't really feel like doing that, and since it's on the inside of the garment, I'm not as worried about it, so I'm going to be skipping that step. Now we're finally going to sew the side seams. So we're going to open up the bodice and match the striped side with the striped side and the purple side with the purple side and sew them together. Turn the bodice right side out. Then it says to sew the edges together all along the back and the bottom. Back up the other side of the back. I decided to do mine using a serger to help keep the edges from fraying, but you could sew them together and then pink the edges or sew them together using a zigzag stitch. I cut the skirt pieces out of the striped fabric and then sewed the darts following the markings on the pattern. I was a little concerned that the striped fabric would be too thin for the skirt, so I cut the pieces out again out of some black cotton, sewed the same darts, and then used that to flatline the striped fabric and sewed the two pieces together using a serger to keep them flush and to finish the edges. Putting right sides together, we're going to sew the two skirt back pieces together from the notch to the circle marked on the pattern pieces. So we're not sewing all the way down, we're just sewing a section in the middle of these two pieces together. Press the seam open and we're going to snip into the seam allowance on either side of the stitching. This was not according to the pattern instructions, but as long as I had the back skirt pieces here and the rest of the dress not attached to them, I went ahead and sewed down on either side of the vent in the back to tack it into place. Sew the skirt front and back pieces together along the side seams. Sew the peplum back pieces together along the center back seam from the notch on the pattern down to the bottom, and then snip the fabric close but don't cut into the stitching. Now we're going to sew the back of the peplum to the front of the peplum along the sides. Then I repeated the same process with the peplum lining fabric. Putting right sides together, we're going to sew the peplum to the peplum lining all along the curved outer edge. I'm not sure how well this is going to show up on camera, but I cut some notches out of the curved seam allowance and then folded the seam allowance over so that it was towards the purple side of the fabric and then sewed it into place to encourage everything to stay where I want it to once it's turned right side out. Turn the peplum right side out and press along the edge, and here's what it looks like. The instructions said to sew the raw edges of the peplum together, but I decided to take it one step further and serge the edges to hold them together and also to help keep it from fraying. Next, we're going to sew the peplum to the base skirt. Sew the bodice onto the skirt/peplum combo and insert a zipper into the back. The pattern instructions call for an invisible zipper, but I'm pretty sure the back of the envelope just said a regular zipper, and a regular zipper is what I had. So that is what I used, and it's not the best zipper I've ever done. It's a little off-center, but close enough. And I also added a hook and eye at the top to add a little bit more closure. Once I had the zipper sewn in the back of the dress, I could try it on and decide how long I wanted the hem to be. This is about where I want the hem to be, so I'm marking a line here all along the edge of the dress so that I can fold the edge inward and it will end up being the length that I want. Then fold the bottom edge of the hem up and hand sew it to that line that we marked, and I sewed just through the lining of the skirt so that the stitching doesn't show on the outside. And with that, the base dress is done. Despite my best efforts, I still couldn't get the stripes to match up perfectly, and I really don't want to rip it out and redo it. So while I had been thinking about doing a belt to bring the purple from the sleeves more into the costume since it's not showing quite as well in the peplum as I would have liked, now I definitely want a belt to cover that up. I thought the dress by itself might be a little plain, so I decided to use the belt from view B to make an additional belt out of the purple fabric. So to do that, I cut the belt piece out of the fabric and then applied some fusible interfacing to the back of it. Fold the belt rectangle in half. Then we're going to sew it together starting from one end, going around the corner and down, leaving a space open so it can be turned right side out, and then around the corner again. The reason why the fabric is missing here is because I trimmed that off to hopefully make it a nicer, pointier corner when it comes time to turn it right side out, which is the next step. Turn the belt right side out and sew the hole closed. I realized afterwards that I accidentally cut out the belt for view C instead of B. That is why I used a smaller seam allowance than the 5/8 inch that is recommended by the pattern. Also, the pattern recommends sewing Velcro onto the ends of the belt to act as a closure, but I decided to sew a skirt hook on either side for a bit more durability. To finish off the belt, I sewed on this green rhinestone beetle. It actually came from a keychain that I got at Joann's, but I thought it would draw in the bug designs and the green tones from the rest of the costume. I did end up sewing it on a little off-center because the print of the fabric is not centered, so as you can see, the design kind of goes up and then it goes back down the way it was printed, so I just found the area where it was the most symmetrical on either side, and it means that the back end of the belt will be not in the exact back of the dress, but hopefully it won't be quite as noticeable. Here's what the dress looks like with the belt, and I think it really makes a difference. Since the dress is supposed to be a party dress, I decided it needed some accessories to jazz it up a little bit. So I went to Joann's and picked up some beads and this hair clip from the clearance section, as well as some rhinestones. For the necklace, I simply took some elastic cord and threaded on the pearls with some green beads in between. Then, to add a little bit more of the color of the costume into the rose, which after taking it off I realized that it was a combination hair clip and a pin, so you could use it either in the hair or as a brooch. I went around the edges with this color shift paint from Plaid. This I got in a PR box from them and wanted to give it a try. It is the Blue Violet Flash, and it's showing up a bit more of a silvery on the black background. It would have shown up more purple if it was on a lighter base, but I still think it really brings out a pop with each of the petals being outlined. And then I used some glue to glue the rhinestones onto the petals to bring in more of that green tone. And with that, the costume is done. For more cosplay sewing videos, please subscribe. And if there are any patterns you would like to see me do a sew along for, let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching.